I'll try and keep it short. I know we're running a little bit late. So this talk's very sort of general overview of Agile for those of you who aren't already doing it in your teams. It is our religion. We will convert you. So Agile, it does a lot of things for a lot of people. And it's important to know why we use it. So everybody knows the why. It's the same why that we do anything, which is money. You know, if we can save money, if we can charge less to our clients, they'll be happier, they'll work with us more. And as we all know, Agile saves money, Agile does things quicker, Agile produces peace in the Middle East and it makes you breakfast in the morning. These things are all proven to be true. But we need to know exactly why that is. And that's because Agile is about reacting quickly to events. So in traditional terms, you've always worked from the beginning, you've planned everything out, and you've worked all the way to the end, and hopefully you've got a really great product at the end. But Agile is more about getting your product in front of people quickly. It's about getting things going, it's about moving as fast as you can and being able to change as things change with you. It does this at very low upfront cost. If you've got a team of 4 people doing something very quickly for 2 weeks, that doesn't really cost you a lot of money. If in order to get your proof of concept out, you need to work for 12 months with a team of 30 people, that's a big investment. If you're working on an R&D team, if you're inside a large company and you're trying to prove that something will work, Agile is perfect for that sort of thing. If you're also trying to deal with large investors and they want some proof that whatever you're planning on doing is actually feasible, get a couple of weeks done, get something in front of some users and find out. So here's comparative between the traditional waterfall. You've all seen variations on this thing. Start off with a big old spec, you get your architect in, get them all planning it out, and they try and second guess everything that every user's ever going to do to the site. You design it, you get a lot of UML, everybody loves UML. Then you build it, you test it, hopefully, and then you deploy it, hopefully, and then you spend about, I don't know, 1.5 years maintaining it. Hopefully, at the end of that great long process, if this is 12 months, 18 months, you actually have something that anyone cares about and anyone actually even wants to use. And if you don't, well, tough shit. Now, the comparative for, say, an iterative style of Agile is that you do the same sort of process, but very quickly. You do it over the period of a week or 2 weeks. You get a deploy out every other day, hopefully, maybe even every day if you're lucky. You get to find out whether the things you're building are actually things that people want. You get to find out whether the market even exists for whatever it is that you're building. And all of these things are really useful for not wasting money. Imagine what would happen if halfway through this process you realized that actually you completely figured it wrong and users didn't want 3 different types of Twitter. Well, you're screwed. You've just wasted 6 months worth of work. Because in order to do the next big thing, you're going to have to go all the way back down to the spec docs again and start from the beginning. If you've done 3 iterations by that point, you know whether you're building something good or not. Next slide, please. So, what can we use to sort of resolve these issues? Well, there's 2 main forms. I mean, there's like 17 different flavors of Agile, but they generally fall into one of 2 types, either iterative, so that's Scrum, that's your XPs, or you get sequential, which is Lean, Kanban, which Kanban sometimes gets used as a word for Lean and Kanban combined. But the ideas behind them is pretty much the same. It's about getting things done quickly, it's about deploying very often, it's about communicating an awful lot. In both of these styles, it's generally agreed that you have several types of meetings, and they're not the boring 4-hour-long type of meetings. You have your daily stand-up, which is called stand-up because everybody stands up, and the reason that they stand up is so that if people sit down, they like to waffle on for hours. If your stand-up is lasting longer than 45 seconds, there is something wrong. That should be your daily team meeting. At the beginning of any iteration, or at a set period if you're doing something like sequential and you don't have iterations, you need to be having a project planning meeting. You need to be able to plan your next iteration. Now, with iterative, that's pretty much the only time you really need the client in the room. The client doesn't come to stand up unless they really want to, and if they do, they don't get to say anything. At your iteration planning meetings, that's where you find out what they want to do for the next week. That's when you find out what they want you to do with their $3,000 or however much it is you're charging them. And you have regular other meetings afterwards called retrospectives. It's quite often that you'll do these on a project basis, so people will get together and find out for that specific project what went well, what went wrong, what you want to change. But you also have to do that as a whole company, and you have to try and refine your process as you go along. So next we have iterative. So let's go into some detail about it. So again, this is Scrum or XP. It's the same slide as before. So you get through this process very quickly, but it's not a continuous process. It's in what Scrum calls sprints and XP calls iterations, which is usually a week, 2 weeks. It depends on the project or the team. And it can be usually of one of two types. It's either a week of little bitty things that the client wants doing that's the most high priority at the time, and you just agree to that set of work. Or it can also be what's called an epic, which is a large feature, which isn't small enough to be able to be done by one person or one pair, but you agree to get that done by the end of the week. At the end of that week or 2 weeks, at the end of that iteration, you then go to the client and say, okay, here you go, delivered, deployed. What do you want next? What do you want in your next iteration? Do you want us to go over it again and do it better? Do you want to do something completely different because the market's shifted? Or do you want to just take your money and go away and not do any more work? The point being that at any stage, at the end of any iteration, the client should have something that they can give to users. They shouldn't have to have this half-finished piece of work, which is a waste of money. They should have something to show for it. So next we've got sequential. So sequential is kind of similar, but instead of having these weekly sprints, these weekly iterations, you're constantly working on whatever's next priority, whatever it is at that exact moment in time. The Kanban board is a tool for doing this. You have a number of columns, they vary depending on the type of person you are, but you have a backlog which is maintained by your client. The reason that sequential or Kanban is rarer in Agile communities is that in order to have your backlog continuously prioritized, you have to have the client on hand all the time. I've only ever done Kanban with one client in the past, and they were in the office 3 times a week, and a representative was in 5 times a week. So it can really only work if you've got that sort of presence. For that reason, it's really great for in-house teams, because your clients are the people sat next to you in the rest of the business. So each of these columns, which are fairly self-explanatory, have a limit on the number of features or user stories that can be in them at any given time. The in-progress sign-off, how they're limited depends on you, it depends on your team. But generally speaking, they're limited to the number of realistic things that any one unit of people can do at once. So for example, if you've got 2 pairs, if you're pairing, and you probably should be, you should only have 2 cards in progress, because a team can't work on 2 things at once. They can only physically code one thing at once. Likewise, sign-off is limited to how much you can get signed off at any given moment. So if you've got 1 client representative and they're doing all the sign-off, you can only have 1 card in sign-off. This means that if you've got a developer who's finished something that's in progress, and there's something already blocking sign-off, they just have to sit there sat on their hands and can't do anything. It sounds kind of counterintuitive to have people sat there for no reason other than because you said they have to. But it identifies problems in the system. If you've got a bunch of developers sat there because you can't get stuff signed off, maybe it's time the client to assign some more people that they can get stuff signed off with. But in any case, it's really just a matter of having a much more granular take on prioritization. So rather than having this week is the most important week's worth of stuff I've got, it's this hour is the most important hour's worth of work that I've got. So it allows you the most agility, but it requires the most dedication on the behalf of the client. Now, where we use these, you can use them pretty much anywhere, but I'm willing to bet that most people in this room are working at one of these 3 types of places. So a client consultancy is somewhere where you have a rail shop, a dev team, and they're building projects for clients. So they're paying you, you're building them, it's not yours, it's theirs. Your in-house teams is when you've been put on salary by a company and you're building their site. So for example, my previous company was a client consultancy, but currently at Revu, I'm on the in-house team. And you also have R&D departments, which service usually large corporations. They do short projects, feasibility studies for different departments in the company, just trying to figure out what projects might work, what might make money, and what they can get done. So if we talk about client consultancies for a second, your main issue, as was mentioned in the previous talk, is the changeable client. They do not know what they want. And why would they? I mean, you're the expert, you're the web person. They just want some vague thing, some vague project to be completed at the end of it all. So if they're changing their minds constantly, you need to be able to change with them, and you need to be able to adapt. And so if you can't do that, you're not going to be servicing that client properly, they're going to be unhappy, and they're going to leave. Money goes down. In the in-house teams, it's very similar to the client consultancy and the sort of issues you face. If you think about your colleagues, if you're working on an in-house team, the people who are working in marketing or in biz dev or wherever they're working, they are your clients. They are the people that you should treat as clients. And so you have to deal with all the same problems as them. They change their minds often. But one of the main driving forces for an in-house team is the shifting market. If you're in a startup, you need to know that you can move quickly to adapt to whatever's going on. You need to not fall over within 3 months because you spent all the money on something that nobody wants. R&D departments, their main need is for a rapid turnaround. They need to be able to work very quickly and produce short projects in a very short period of time. If they can't do that, they can't do their job. If some other part of the business notices a trend in the markets and they want to capitalize on that trend, it's really awkward to then go to them and say, yeah, sure, we'll tell you whether that's possible in 9 months. It's just not feasible. You've got to be able to get things out in weeks. Beyond that, so how you do this. So generally speaking, in all the successful Agile teams I've found, they've started with one of the prescriptive books like Scrum or XP, and then they've added things to it. They've modified it until it doesn't really look like what it started out as in the first place. The books are really useful as a starting point, but if you're still working off them within about a month or 2 months, you're probably doing something wrong. They're great for discipline, though. So I always recommend that if you're starting off a new team, starting them on one of the prescriptive books, following the rules exactly is really good for starting the discipline. Once they understand the rules, they can start changing them. And finally, I'll just wrap it up quite quickly. Take-home points. Use small teams, 1 to 3 pairs. If you're looking at 8 people, it's getting a bit big. If you're beyond 8 people, you need to start splitting your team. You can't work with that number of people in one team. Give them freedom. Now, freedom to do anything, as long as they get the job done. We're talking freedom of technology. If they don't want to use Rails, well, then don't force them to use Rails. Let them use what they're comfortable with. Give them freedom of time and working habits. There's a concept called ROW, which is results-only working environment. And that is that you put them into an environment where the only things matter is results. If they do what they do, but they do it from home, or they do it from the cafe, or they do it while drunk, that's okay. As long as they get the job done and it doesn't cause a problem. Give them freedom of process. If you are a Scrum Master and your team doesn't like Scrum that much, you probably shouldn't just force them to do it because it's what you like. You've got to give them freedom. For example, at Revu, we take 1 day a week, and any of us at any point in that day can just do whatever we like. It doesn't have to be something that's directly related to Revu, though obviously preferably it is. But we can work on any open source project, we can go read books, we can do whatever we like. And that sort of freedom really helps with any of the sort of motivation issues that you have with keeping focused and learning. If you're starting off afresh, you probably want to start with something like Scrum or XP. Try Kanban if that fits for your environment, for your team. And just adapt it, find out what works and what doesn't, and change things. But don't be a slave to the rules. I mean, they're there to be broken once you understand them. And one of the most important aspects of integrating Agile into any company that hasn't really used it before is you need to eradicate this old thinking that everything needs to be spec'd out and done with UML diagrams. I have an ex-colleague who works somewhere which claims to be Agile, and yet they're not allowed to actually modify their staging environment without going through the infrastructure team, and all code must sit on staging for 3 weeks before it gets promoted live, and they do not work at a nuclear power station. So if you get rid of your old thinking and you take a chance on Agile, persuade your managers to do it, I think it's going to work out really well for you. Thanks. Any quick questions? Okay, thanks. Well, if you do have any questions later, you can grab me, and also we from Ruby are here. We're actually recruiting a team in Kiev to do some work, so if you want to talk about that, grab me, George, or any of the Cyclum representatives here.